Good. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulih al-Kareem. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm afraid I have to declare a conflict of interest. I'm sure many of you already know there's a bit of nepotism going on here. I'm the father of the events organizer and the chair, so if this turns out to be one of your worst talks, you know who to blame. I often deliver a variant of this lecture to three different types of groups. The first is bankers and practitioners. The second is university students like yourselves, and the third is teenagers. And of those, I think the teenagers and the university students are much more interesting to talk to than the bankers and practitioners. And you'll discover during the course of this talk, I hope, why the bankers and practitioners really are carrying so much baggage that it's virtually impossible for them to change the way they think anymore. So I remember when I ran a university Islamic society many years ago, we invited an Islamic bank to talk to us about Islamic finance, and the bankers wore sharp suits and they, spoke a jargon that I didn't understand. I didn't understand a word of it, nor did I care. To me, finance, I was a science student, but to me, finance and economics were irrelevant to my life. These peddlers of jargon just didn't connect with me at all. So I think they missed a perfect opportunity to explain and influence a group of bright young people who potentially could have done some very, very interesting things with their lives, what it is that they were doing, and what it was to live and work in a halal, ethical, and just economy. The reason was they simply didn't understand their work well enough, their subject matter well enough. And I'm afraid that persists today. Islamic bankers and Islamic financiers, one of the things before I came here, I was asked, would you do a talk on Islamic finance? You can talk about student loans and are mortgages halal and Islamic banking halal. And I said, yeah, but it's kind of boring. And there's a whole bunch of people out there who can talk about this stuff. But actually, I think there's a much more fundamental question that we need to address, which is there a better system than the one we've been given, a better economic and monetary system than the one we've been given? Also, when I was a university student running an ISOC, we invited another group. It was a group called Murabitun. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They advocated the return of a gold standard. In fact, the return of gold as a global currency. And again, I didn't really understand what it was they were saying. They didn't explain it in a language that I understood. So if at any time I haven't managed to explain to you why we should have a particular monetary standard and why it's important to all of our lives, not just if we're studying English or physics or medicine or maths, but for all of us, if I haven't got that message over, please pull me up at the end, make me explain it again, because that is what I'm here to do. So the other thing I remember from the speech by the Murabitun was when one of my friends who was a second-year PPE student, so studying economics, he asked a question, very basic question. Any economists in the audience, by the way, just a show of hands if there are any? No economists. Anyone? Yes, good. Management, anyone? Maybe they don't have the, okay. That's interesting. He asked a very standard economics question. He asked, what about the time value of money? It doesn't matter what that actually means, but it was a very standard question and it should have been responded to in a respectful way. And she was very rude with how she responded. In fact, she made an anti-Semitic slur in responding to him. So once again, I felt that the people who had come to explain to us a fundamental aspect of our lives that changes society for the better had failed to get that point across. And if I fail to do that today, please, again, I say it again, please pull me up on it. So, one of the worries that I have about economics and finance is that people tend to think that these things are reserved for bankers and economists, and they dress up what they say in jargon. They obfuscate what it is they're trying to. They don't try and tell us what they're saying. They obfuscate it. They disguise what they're saying, and we end up assuming that these, gatekeepers to modern finance must know better than us. But that isn't the case, because what I hope to show you today is that economics is not a science. It's actually, in modern terms, modern neoclassical economics is a dogma. It's not rational. It's based on false models. And I'm going to keep using the phrase, it's priests speaking Latin. And I'm going to come back to that later. So in my view, the economy today is broken. Capitalism, modern capitalism is a broken system. What is it about the Islamic economic model that is a fairer and more just system? Okay, so let's talk about money. What is money? Well, there are a couple of ways we can look at it. First of all, I tend to look at what heterodox economists, not orthodox economists, are saying, and indeed what anthropologists say about this. Most people will agree that money should be a medium of exchange. It has no value by itself. It's used to measure the value of other things, the real economy, real goods and services, right? Now, some people, some anthropologists, there's a guy called David Graeber who passed away recently. He wrote a book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. Many people who are involved in my line of work tend to disregard what a guy like David Graeber said on this subject. He contended that money originates as debt. Most economists will say money originates as barter, right? And I think that's the conventional understanding of how money originates. But let's look at the other version, the heterodox version that anthropologists might say. So 5,000 years ago, agrarian societies created elaborate systems to buy and sell on credit, since no coinage has been invented. So, for example, a farmer buys clothes from a merchant with an IOU. The merchant pays a carpenter to fix his door. The farmer's standing in the community is good, so this IOU is taken on faith. And that's where we get this word credere from the Latin, to believe, credit. Money originates as credit, as debt. Now, imagine that a community has become large enough and powerful enough that it's able to conquer and enslave neighboring regions. Human beings are reduced to inventory, material commodities to be traded as slaves. Now, early civilizations, as you might know, held surplus commodities in what we now call temples. They're really sort of industrial concerns. So commodities were lent out to merchants by the priests, and these commodities were traded by the merchants. Of course, profit and loss sharing and auditing of the accounts of these merchants was very difficult. So what the priest would say is, well, I'll give you these goods, but at interest. So you have to pay me back a surplus on what I've given you. And I demand some collateral for that as well. And sometimes collateral was, grain or livestock. But if that was insufficient to repay, what else could collateral be? Well, it might be a human being. It might be your own family. And so human beings became bonded labor. And owning a human being became debt's most egregious manifestation. So slaves were not just war booty now. They were actually, it could be anyone. Debt leads to slavery. And what is the primary enforcement mechanism? It's violent coercion, right? So that's to ensure debt is passed down from generation to generation. And I think this is very important. I mean, we can see many religious texts, for example, look at the Bible, we look at Book of Judea. No, I can't remember, Book of Nehemiah. The 5th century BC, the law of Jubilee was instituted. And this was the government of Judea announced a clean slate every Sabbath year, every 7th year, so that all debt peons will be returned to their families. Why would you do this? To ensure there's no revolution. Because if you have too many slaves and they rise up against you, they can overthrow you just by numbers. So we see that religious law over time has outlawed, for the sake of fairness and justness and equality, has outlawed interest. Even in the Bible, we see, and I often use this particular one because I often speak to either a non-Muslim audience or an audience that has no particular faith, and they tend to be more familiar with biblical phrases. So the particular extract that I use is John chapter 2, 13 to 16, and Matthew 21, 13. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. This is the time of the Passover. So Jesus is in the temple of Herod, and there are a huge number of pilgrims around. And he goes into the temple. And as it says, in making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables and the seats of them that sold doves. And he told those that sold the pigeons, take these things away and do not make God's house a house of trade. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. This is the only violent act that is recorded in the Bible that Jesus committed. Our own Imam Ghazali, one of our classical theologians, he himself said it becomes easy for the financier to earn more money on the basis of interest without bothering himself to take pains in real economic activities. This is a very important point, real economic activities. So interest is not a real economic activity. The interests of humanity cannot be safeguarded without real trade, skills, industry, and construction. And Ghazali also said, Allah created dirhams and dinars so that they may be circulated between hands, a medium of exchange for real goods and services. and act as a fair judge between different commodities and work as a medium to acquire other things. That's what money is meant to be, a medium of exchange. What does it become today? It's become something that you trade as a commodity. We trade bonds on stock exchanges. We trade other people's cash flows, right? Every time we enter into a transaction in which I pay interest to somebody, I've created an excess. There's one school of thought, which is a very, very minority school of thought. The absolute consensus is that all interest, 1 penny on £1 million is an excess, and therefore its interest is riba. It's an excess. That minority view, I don't know why it's gained traction in some places, that a little bit of interest is fine. Usury is something else. Usury is something much more exploitative. But actually, any excess on a principal amount of money is considered riba. We have many notable things in Quran and Hadith which point us to this. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 275 says that Allah has permitted trade and forbidden interest. That's the clearest example of the banning of riba. It's considered one of the most heinous sins. It actually ranks alongside, believe it or not, shirk and murder, the taking of a human life. And yet we've normalized it today. We say, oh, it's okay to have a little bit of interest. My bank account takes a little bit of interest. I pay interest on my mortgage. Well, I'm not receiving interest, so that must be okay. But actually, the people who are condemned are the ones who take interest, the ones who give interest, and the one who witnesses and facilitates interest, right? They're all equally culpable. Allah has declared war against those who deal with riba. And the reason why is because it creates inequality. The rich get rich and the poor get poorer. If you have money, you can make more money. That doesn't seem fair, doesn't seem right intuitively. We don't need economists to tell us that, right? The worst excess of this is the creation of something called a fractional reserve banking system. And I'm going to come on to this a little bit later. And it is the reason why I believe capitalism today, modern capitalism, is a massive failure. Fractional reserve banking system. So just remember that phrase, and I'm going to come back to it. I often show these pictures, and I particularly show them to teenagers. Often they don't know, they don't recognize these pictures. Anyone recognize what these are? Stick up a hand if you might recognize some of these pictures. Yes. So you know that the one on the left is from the Great Depression, 1936. That is a very famous picture taken by a photojournalist who stopped by the side of the road in California and photographed a group of pea pickers who obviously were left destitute by the Great Depression. She is surrounded by 7 children. I always ask teenagers, what do you think she's thinking? Clearly this is somebody who doesn't know where her next meal is coming from. It's a very, very famous depiction of the Great Depression. The one in the middle is 1993. It was taken by a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist called Kevin Carter, who committed suicide very shortly after taking this picture. This was in the South Sudan, a child on the way to a feeding station. Happily, the child made it. But he and other photojournalists were told not to interfere in the process. This is bizarre. They were told not to help, not to contribute, it just seems bizarre to me. One of the reasons, I think he was obviously a very deeply troubled man, but he felt so guilty that he was photographing, the worst examples of what mankind can do to itself. And this, I firmly believe, is what the modern financial system has done to us. It has created such inequality in society that people from rich countries can take photos of people from poor countries starving on the way to a feeding station to sell newspapers. So Kevin Carter took his life. The one on the right, I'm sure you all recognize this, is Grenfell Tower, where 72 people lost their lives because they didn't want to pay an extra £2 per piece of cladding because their discounted cash flow model told them it was not commercially viable or cost effective. And that cost the lives of 72 people. So that's the world that we live in. Do we think that our politicians can find a solution to this inequality? Absolutely not. There's just no way. The House of Commons debated in 2014 the subject of money creation for the first time in 170 years. And only 30 MPs attended that debate, whereas there's something like 600 MPs attended the debate on their own expenses that same year, right? So obviously that was much more important to them. But this kind of thing is not important to them. As I say, 30 MPs. They did a poll of all the MPs at the time in the House of Commons, and 72% of all MPs in this country believe only government has the power to create money. This is wrong, factually incorrect. Actually, 97% of all money in this economy is created by private banks. How is it created? Through the alchemy of fractional reserve banking. That's that phrase I'm using again. And I'll again come back to it. They create money through the act of lending. Every time they lend you money, they have magic money out of thin air. And I'm going to talk about the magic money tree as well. Right. Tale of the Mexican fisherman. Anyone heard this story? Yeah, some people have. Good. Okay. An American businessman is standing at the pier of a picturesque coastal village in Mexico when a small boat docks, and the lone fisherman steps out of the boat with his catch for the day, which is several large yellowfish tuna. And the American compliments the Mexican fisherman on the quality of his fish. How long did it take you to catch them? Says the American tourist. Only a short while, replies the fisherman. Why don't you stay out and catch some more? Asks the American. I have enough to support my family and their needs, said the fisherman. But what will you do with the rest of your time? So the fisherman says, I sleep late, I fish a little, I play with my children, I take a siesta with my wife, and in the evening I stroll into the village, we sip wine, and I sing songs with my friends. So the American scoffs. He says, I have a Harvard MBA. Oh, sorry, I have a Judge Business School MBA, and I work as a management consultant for McKinsey, and I can help you. How, senor? Says the fisherman, taken aback. You spend more time fishing, and with the proceeds, you buy a bigger boat. And then with the catch from the bigger boat, you buy several boats. And eventually you'd have a fleet. And instead of selling your catch to a middleman, you have the power to sell directly to the customer. And eventually you open your own canning factory and you control the product, the processing, and the distribution. You could leave this small coastal village and move to Mexico City. After that, Los Angeles, and then eventually New York, where you'd run your expanding enterprise. How long would that take, says the fisherman? Oh, 15, maybe 20 years. And after that, well, this is where it gets really interesting, says the management consultant with the MBA from Cambridge University. When the time is right, you announce an initial public offering and you sell the company's shares to the public. You would be rich. You'd make millions. Millions, senor. Then what? You retire. You move to a beautiful coastal village where you sleep late, catch a little fish, play with your children, take a siesta. In the evening, you stroll into the village and you sing songs with your friends. Right. So it's very obvious what this story is saying. It's a very corny story. I repeat it every time. We live in a world that's defined by GDP, gross domestic product. It's a measure of the exchange value of goods, not the experiential value of our lives. GDP does not measure literacy, mental health, divorce, suicide rates, environmental pollution. It measures exchange value, not experiential value. So, how do we fix this broken economy? Later on, I'm going to talk about the concept of sound money. And I'm going to introduce you now to the concept of fiat money. Fiat is money that is decreed to be money by a government. So examples of fiat money are pound sterling, US dollar, the euro, the yen. Every currency that you use is fiat currency. And I want to, over this course of this talk, I want to talk about why fiat money is unsound and bad for human progress, for environmental stability, and for peace, right? So this unbridled pursuit of profit has led to this. Everybody knows this is Mecca. The only thing I can see is a massive carbuncle in the middle, which is the clock tower, right? I can't even see the Kaaba in the middle of it. That's what dominates the skyline now. And I mean, I think the government holds this up as an example of progress and economic success, but actually what it's done, it's destroyed history in the process. Another example that's used by, and I'm going to give you a few authors and a few thinkers in this space. I'd like you to look up Varoufakis, who is a Greek economist. He used to be the finance minister of Greece. I think he was an economics professor at Exeter University. He uses example, and it's a book called Teaching My Daughter About the Economy, something like that. It's a red cover. Have a look for it. Varoufakis is his name. He gives the example of a forest fire. He says a forest fire takes place. What it does is it raises GDP in that region. The reason why is because you use fuel to get to the fire. The firemen wages have to be paid. You have to use equipment and transport to get there. But of course, we know it reduces experiential value because the forest is being destroyed, right? So this is the really weird thing. Things happen that raise the GDP that we know intuitively, common sense tells us are bad things, and yet those numbers go up. Similarly, if you read an author called Tariq al-Diwani, who's a bit of a cult figure in the Islamic finance space, he writes a book called The Problem with Interest. Tariq al-Diwani, I recommend that book. He's an advocate of what we call Austrian economics. And he gives the example that the calculation methodology that economists and financiers use today, the discounted cash flow methodology, is inherently a bad calculation methodology because it ascribes greater value to things that happen nearer in time than further in time. So it incentivizes people to invest in projects which have immediate gratification, which have high time preference, not low time preference. Think of us as Muslims. We all should have low time preference. We invest in our akhirah. We have sabr, we have patience. You know, we control our nafs in Ramadan. We learn to discipline ourselves. We learn that deferred gratification is good for us. In fact, clinical studies show that people who exhibit deferred gratification in their early age demonstrate greater success in later life. We know that. It's intuitive, it's common sense. And yet the financial methodology that people use, the discounted cash flow methodology, encourages us to desertify the land, right? To plant and use the land in a way that will ruin it within a short space of time. And that's why we're ruining the planet. This is how modern economics or neoclassical economics is taught. It is not based on reality, but it constructs false models. And as I say, I believe it's because the priests are speaking Latin. So in the Middle Ages, Christian priests, of course, only delivered their sermons in Latin. They were there to translate the word of God into a language that the lay people understood. They were the gatekeepers to God. Well, of course, we don't believe that in vicarious atonement. We don't have a middleman to give us access to God. We access God 5 times a day directly, right? But the priests speaking Latin were there as gatekeepers, and the fact that they spoke this jargon meant that the lay people didn't understand it. And today the economists are the priests speaking Latin. If we took a moment to step back, I know we're studying English and medicine and maths and engineering and subjects that don't have a relationship with economics. But if you took a step back, we'd know that common sense is telling us these people must be wrong. There must be something fundamentally wrong with what they're saying to us. It's not science. Economics is not a science. I often use the example of somebody called Saifuddin Ammous. I recommend a book that he's written called The Bitcoin Standard. Saifuddin describes the fiat business model. Remember this phrase, fiat money? Fiat money is money that is decreed to be money by government, so the dollar, the pound, and so on. The fiat business model is as follows. Number 1, find anything to sell, even or preferably at a loss. Number 2, borrow from the Fed or a central bank at 2% at a very low interest rate. Number 3, give a credit card to customers at 20%, right? That's what banks do. Number 4, people are in debt for stupid things they don't need, but it's okay because money loses value anyway through inflation. And number 5, GDP number goes up, right? That's all people care about is GDP number goes up, and they don't care how it happens. So this 5-step fiat business model is how it happens. Now, what I've just described to you, I hope you're all sitting there thinking, that's just stupid. That's reality. That's how the business model works today. That's how businesses operate today. What's happened is empirical and statistical analysis of economic history has been excluded from university curriculum. So economic reality is not a part of the syllabus anymore. This lobbying by big corporates who fund these schools, who fund MBA schools, is a sort of selective amnesia, right? It's great swathes of economic history have been ignored because the interests of big corporate don't accord with them. So it's a dogma that is taught that celebrates big corporate and this fiat business model, not criticizes them. It's something we refer to as the Chicago School of Economics. It advocates the financialization of the economy, right? So if any of you studied the 2008 financial crisis, that occurred because of the financialization of the economy. There was more debt and more financial services. So we've created a market society as a joyless place which measures exchange value and not experiential value. The innovation and inventiveness of society has decreased. There's no clearer demonstration to me of this than the vacuous culture of TikTok houses and pop culture influencers, people who aren't really adding anything to society. I know it's fun, right? So I see people smiling. I'm sure you enjoy TikTok, but it's not really adding anything beneficial to society. I think it's sort of collective stupidity that we are encouraging in society. We're encouraged to be stupid. We make stupid decisions. We elect stupid leaders, who make stupid decisions. I'm very pleased that you guys in a place like Cambridge, where you have a great role model like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, right? These are people that I think have something solid and something worth looking up to. Okay, so I'm sure you guys are familiar with the picture on the right. You guys recognize it? People nodding. Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. I find it uncanny how that clock tower in Mecca is so similar to the Eye of Sauron. By the way, I have a confession to make, and I always feel bad whenever I say this, but I'm afraid I have a hand to play in the construction of those towers on the left. That tower on the right, just behind, I financed that one. It's the very first sukuk, which I did at Deutsche Bank, which was a Sharia-compliant bond to finance the construction of that tower. I didn't realize at the time, when I was a junior banker, the hand that I had in participating in the wholesale destruction of our own heritage, because mountains were detonating into billions of pebbles. There was devastation of the surrounding area. And for the government, this was about dragging Mecca into the modern era. But in reality, it was an example of how modern notions of financial success lead to what some would argue is an act of evil, right? We destroyed history in this process. Now the clock tower dominates Mecca, not the Kaaba. My personal story is that I was a co-founder of the Deutsche Bank Islamic Finance team about 20 years ago. And at one time, it was possible to have technically excellent Muslims who were ideologically aligned, who believed in the Islamic economic model, who were doing extraordinary things, and still be highly profitable within an organization like an investment bank. And at Deutsche Bank at that time, we invented something. It was to become our Manhattan Project. Is anyone familiar with the term Manhattan Project? A few people nodding. So during the Second World War, the Allied scientists were assembled in the desert, Los Alamos Desert, to create the atom bomb before Hitler created it. And this splitting of the atom was known as the Manhattan Project. And we had our own version of splitting of the atom. We created a black box at Deutsche Bank to replicate the returns of any financial product in a Sharia compliant manner. It sounds wrong in spirit. Technically, contractually, it adhered to fiqh al-mu'amalat, the jurisprudence of commercial and financial transactions in Sharia. But the spirit of the law was lost in the process. And just like splitting of the atom, you can use nuclear power for good, you can use it for bad. This ended up destroying the market for what was called structured investment products. My boss at the time said, we create conservative products for conservative investors and aggressive products for aggressive investors. That's the worst thing you could say to people who want to invest on an ethical basis in a way that aligns with their faith. The worst thing you can say is, hey, however Sharia compliant you want to be, I'll go whatever you want, right? It's called fatwa shopping. You go around looking for the fatwa that will give credence and credibility to the financial product that you're selling. There was a big spat in the industry. One of the scholars accused the scholar who had architected our deal as having created the doomsday fatwa. And I think he was right. There are many parallels in medieval Christian financing. The church had originally banned usury. And Christian financiers found a way around this in the Middle Ages. They created 3 contracts, each of which was compliant with church law that banned usury and interest. But when you put the 3 together, and it became contractum trinius, 3 contracts together, it created the effect of a loan with interest. And the church said, well, each of these contracts is compliant on its own, so I guess it's okay. And of course, today, the church is not even interested in that subject anymore. By 1917, the Vatican itself was investing in interest-bearing bonds. I think that Islamic banks are doing the same thing today. We have created our own contracting trinities. So whilst I still use Islamic banks for my services, because I think it's better than using conventional banks, unfortunately, I feel that Islamic banks are not the future of the Islamic economic model. I know that I'm being recorded right now, and normally when I'm doing a non-recorded session, I talk about Goldman Sachs, but I'm not going to talk about Goldman Sachs because I don't want to get sued, and I don't want you guys to get sued. So if anyone wants to talk about Goldman Sachs with me afterwards, I'll be very happy to have a private session with them. But I'm just going to leave you with one phrase that was written by a journalist called Matt Taibbi for Rolling Stone magazine. He said, "It's the world's most powerful investment bank is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money." It's a perfect description. Right, let's talk about British Islamic banks. Again, I have to be a little bit careful here. The CEOs of the Islamic banks in the UK are, I used to say predominantly, but now they are all white, middle-aged, non-Muslim men. Generally, they don't buy Sharia-compliant products for their own portfolios. They hire and promote in their own mold. They are openly Islamophobic, and you can verify this for yourselves. If you Google a Daily Mail article, sorry that I'm referring to Daily Mail, I know that normally they're Islamophobic, but on this occasion, they were relaying the results of an employment tribunal by a bank called Gatehouse Bank. That's not the company I work for Gateway, just want to point that out. Gatehouse Bank CEO and COO were hauled up for, by the employment tribunal for unfairly discriminating against one of their Muslim employees. Please read the case. It is very enlightening. And those two men still have their jobs. They still have their jobs despite being employed by Qatari shareholders who ought to know better. I will leave you to look it up. Google it, Gatehouse Bank on the Daily Mail. So shareholders have a white savior complex. That's a fact. These banks in the UK have collectively lost £200 million at a time when the banking industry has been highly profitable. And the Islamic banks, you think, would be even more profitable because they effectively have a monopoly position. You don't have a choice. You only got one game in town to go to, right? They should be minting money, and yet they've lost £200 million. Why is that? Well, I think there's a number of factors. First of all, management have no technical understanding of the products, of how to structure them as Sharia compliant. So they rely on other people to do that for them. They have almost no Islamic finance products in their own personal portfolios. They aren't even customers of their own product. There's obviously a credibility gap there. There are no pre-existing deep networks in the Islamic finance industry because they all come from conventional banking. They have no cultural affinity or trust with the community that they serve. There's that trust gap. They've got no understanding of a holistic, sustainable, ethical economic model. They've got a vague understanding of what it means to be Sharia compliant by reference to prohibitions. Or I'm not allowed to invest in this, and I'm not allowed to invest in that. I mean, it's just basic. So this is a lazy and ultimately harmful understanding of the Islamic economic model. So it's no surprise to me, it's no surprise to any of you that there's a trust gap. Customers just don't trust them. Anyone at a conference who sits on the stage and says Sharia, for me, loses the right to discuss or lead Islamic finance. And the worst thing they say is, oh, I'm not a Muslim, but my understanding of Sharia is, please shut up. Why are you here? Why are you running this place? Why are shareholders appointing people like you? I mean, that's why I have a picture of the dinosaurs watching the asteroid hit the Earth, because this is what's going to happen to Islamic banks, I guarantee it. They're going to die unless they hire Muslims to do this. There is a purge taking place on the shop floor at the moment. The heart of the industry is being ripped out. All the passionate, knowledgeable people, the ones who believe in and buy the product themselves, are being pushed out and sidelined through branch closures, through redundancies, through simply not being employed by the industry. I am constantly inundated by people who say, I want to work in Islamic banking, I want to work in Islamic finance. How can I get in? I say, mate, you're Muslim. Good luck with that. You need to look and act and think and be like them. because it's not an industry that rewards people who are ideologically aligned with the Islamic economic model. And that is why it's failing. That's why there's a trust gap. For a while, there was an exception. Al Rayan Bank had a young, intelligent, dynamic man of Bangladeshi origin, and he did a good job in galvanizing and bringing together a group of superb young Muslims who are very motivated. I still speak to many of them on the shop floor. Brilliant people, and I'm very sad that their industry is being ruined from up high. Something very interesting was said to me by the head of an Islamic fintech firm. He said to me that the UK Islamic banks seem to be engaging in political money laundering. It's like they've deliberately set out to hire the least credible people and burn money. That's what you do if you have a money laundering operation, right? You want to wash cash through the system, and you lose a bit of money as you do it, but at least you've cleaned your money up from nefarious places. I thought it was very interesting that he thought there was a political money laundering process going on. It's like someone overseas is wandering around with £100 million in their pocket they want to clean up. So they buy a bank in the UK, buy a license, point anybody who kind of vaguely the face fits, let it lose some money on the way. They don't really care what happens. They don't care about the customers. They don't care about the employees. They don't care about the other stakeholders. They don't care about the ideological vision. That's something that we had in Islamic finance 50, 40 years ago. We don't have it anymore, unfortunately. Islamic banking generally around the world has become general managers leading managers. But if you look at the great companies of the world, they're always experts leading experts, not general managers leading managers with business degrees. Have you ever heard of a car company that was founded by a non-engineer? Names like Honda and Mercedes-Benz, Porsche. Engineers founded these companies. Do you know any car manufacturer that employs no engineers to build engines and chassis? Is there a single car company that does that, that doesn't have experts who actually build the product? I'll tell you, in the UK, I would be hard pressed to find a single individual who is capable of building new financial products. It doesn't exist. And that's why the product's not being given to the customers in the way the customers want them. Let me be clear. I don't necessarily think the product themselves are not halal. I know there's a lot of people in this industry. I have a good friend of mine in the industry, a guy called Safdar Alam, if you want to follow him on social media. I think he speaks a lot of sense. I have great respect for his views. He's distanced himself from the Islamic banking industry. He thinks it's not halal at all. I think there is an accommodation to be made. I think there are some products, even within this, what I call the fractional reserve banking system. Again, I'm going to come back to that to explain it to you. Even within that framework, which can sometimes get close to being halal. And I'm prepared to use those because it's the best of a bad job. But there's a fundamental problem, which I'm going to come on to. Are you guys familiar with the phrase fintech, financial technology? It's any technology that is used to support or enable banking and financial services. So you guys might use Monzo and Starling and Revolut and other mobile phone apps to do your payment services and so on. That's fintech. About 4 years ago, I wrote a white paper for HM Treasury. And in that white paper, which was called Putting the City and the UK Economy Back on the Global Islamic Finance Map, I contended that the UK was losing its place in Islamic finance globally, and it was losing ground to places like Istanbul and Dubai and Kuala Lumpur and Bahrain and so on, despite the rhetoric of British politicians, which was very much backslapping and what a wonderful job we're doing. Isn't London great? We have all the best Islamic finance people here. I said that wasn't the case. I said, fintech is the future. Islamic banks are losing ground. We need to focus on the technology. So take back the initiative and combine London's qualities as a global financial center with tech leadership. So I recommended setting up a fintech panel and working with fintech companies to bring the whole sort of ecosystem and infrastructure together. This became grassroots Islamic economy. Now I was meeting founders of Islamic fintech firms, of startups, who themselves were Muslim and disillusioned. They tried to get a product at an Islamic bank in the UK. They weren't able to get that product. So they invented their own company with its own products. That's what's happening right now. Young Muslims are reclaiming the narrative about the Islamic economy back from the Islamic banks. They're creating their own jobs. They're struggling because the capital is not there. It's very hard to convince a Silicon Valley investor to put money into Islamic finance. They don't know anything about it. And you can't convince Islamic institutions overseas to invest in fintech because it's against their own interests. What I contend is failing to adapt will be an existential threat for the Islamic banks. But what if there was an even more radical solution than just fintech, than doing a Revolut, an Islamic version of Revolut and Monzo? What if you tore up the rule book and said, I'm not even going to bother trying to replicate what the banks do and banking products? What if the financier became the servant and not the master? What if we had institutions that adhered to principles of risk sharing and real economy, which is what Ghazali was talking about earlier, rooted in a hard monetary system that can't create new money by the act of extending credit? Remember I said to you that money creation, 97% of money in the economy is created by private sector banks, not by the government. Let's talk about that. When the banks lend you money, what they're actually doing is creating new money. And that's what I term the magic money tree. So this phrase I'm using, fractional reserve banking, what is it? Let's take you back to the 16th century. Of course, everybody used gold coins to buy goods and services. So because it's heavy and difficult to carry around and unsafe to hold gold, you deposit it with a goldsmith and you put it in his safe. And the goldsmith gives you a piece of paper and says, you've deposited £5 of gold with me. I owe you £5. Now you have a piece of paper with the goldsmith's signature on it. And everybody knows this guy's a good, upstanding guy and he's good for the money, right? So everybody goes to the goldsmith, they deposit their gold coins with him. And soon in the economy, you've got all these pieces of paper circling around, backed by real gold sitting in a vault somewhere. And people say, oh yeah, that's a £5 note from such and such goldsmith. That's good. You can buy goods and services with this, sure. And that circulates as money. Eventually, the goldsmith has a genius idea. He says, you know what? People are not coming back to me to redeem their gold. It's just sitting there. What if I issue more pieces of paper than I actually have gold? Now I have a fractional reserve. For every £1 of gold I have sitting in my vault, maybe I can lend out an extra £4. I can be a lender. I can lend an extra £4 and earn interest on it. That's the origin of banks. That's the origin story of the Bank of England. And that's called fractional reserve banking. So every time you deposit £1 in HSBC or Barclays or Lloyds, they're lending out another £9 against that, or £10, or whatever the number is. They've created an extra £8, £9, £10 in the act of lending. That's magic. That's alchemy of money. Intuitively, common sense tells us there's something radically wrong with that, right? You should all be thinking at this moment, that doesn't make any sense. And that is literally how banking works today. It's called fractional reserve banking. So there's another phrase that you might come across, quantitative easing. Have you heard this phrase, QE? People nodding, quantitative easing. Okay, this is another example of the priest speaking Latin. All of the concepts that economists dress up in fancy words to confuse us and obfuscate us are intended that you stop using common sense. Let's talk about QE. It's basically a monetary policy whereby a central bank, Bank of England, the US Fed, buys financial instruments, typically long-dated bonds, listed on exchange somewhere, or corporate bonds or government bonds, from other financial companies or pension funds. So the government gives them money, they take bonds in return from a pension fund, in order to inject new money into the economy. So the government is now giving financial companies like pension funds and banks more money. This helps to lower long-term interest rates because you've raised the price of bonds, so the interest rate has come down. And that means you've lowered the cost of borrowing, which stimulates economic growth, because when interest rates are low, we all like to borrow and we buy cars and houses and stupid mobile phones and stuff every 12 months, right? That's the theory of QE. Here's the practice. This new money is simply created on the central bank's balance sheet. So the US Fed or Bank of England have a number, which is a reserve account, bank reserves, that goes up. The number value of the bank reserves, digits in a computer, simply goes up. They've created new money. Colloquially, we call this money printing. Of course, nobody's actually printing pound notes. They're just raising the value of the digits in their computer. And now you have more cash in these accounts, and the amount of money circulating in the economy has now increased by magic. You don't have more gold, you don't have more real assets backing this, you just increase the digits. So financial institutions now have more cash in their accounts. They can now hold it, they can lend it, or they can use it to buy other assets. That means asset prices go up, like houses, like financial stocks. And lower interest rates caused by the central bank's purchase of long-dated bonds means that consumers, that's us, are incentivized to borrow more. Interest rates come down, we say, ooh, I quite fancy that new iPhone X or that new BMW, or I can upsize my house now because it's cheaper to borrow money. And we all do that. So there's a further increase in asset prices. The government tells us this is a good thing. And the people think this is a good thing because apparently their houses and their pensions are worth a lot more than they used to be. What's actually happened is the value of currency has diluted. There's more of it sloshing around in the economy. So each pound is now worth less. People feel richer, but they're in fact poorer. It is in fact inflation. It's a regressive stealth tax. What's actually happening is the money we have in our pockets has become worth less because more of it is about. Our wages don't rise as fast as the asset prices because the little people like us are further away from the money spigot. So this tap that the government turns on is close to the banks, it's close to financial institutions who get the money first. We're far away from it. By the time that money trickles down to us, it's already inflated. Inflation has taken place, right? Our wages haven't risen as fast, but asset prices have risen much faster. So it costs us more to buy houses and cars and mobile phones. As I say, this is a regressive stealth tax. And actually the wealthy are the least affected by inflation. They hold very little fiat money as a percentage of their net worth. It's lower income workers who suffer the most from this stealth tax. So I mentioned Saifuddin Musa's Fiat business model earlier, in which modern economics teaches us to find anything to sell, borrow from the Fed at 2%, give credit cards to customers at 20%. People are in debt for stupid things they don't need, but it's okay because money loses value, and GDP number goes up. This is the financialization of the economy that I was talking about, the Chicago School of Economics that I talked about earlier. And this model means that GDP goes up, but the inventiveness of society goes down. We no longer have time or space to devote to things that improve our lives. Look at the periods of human history when there was a gold standard, a real asset-backed currency that backed all of global trade. You look at Rome at its height, Byzantium at its height, the Islamic Golden Age, Europe in the second half of the 19th century when there was a global gold standard. Notice how trade was borderless and fluid during those times. There were minimal tariffs and restrictions. There were periods of political stability and peace, and there was scientific and cultural progress. Look at the architecture from those periods. And then notice what happened, because humankind had time and space for higher pursuits. When you didn't have a gold standard, look at what happens to architecture. Look at architecture today, it's steel and glass buildings, right? Now every household has a minimum of 2 jobs and massive personal debt. We live to service our debt, and all because financial institutions are incentivized to lend us as much cheap money as possible because of money creation by central banks. But again, I ask the question, what if financial institutions were the servant and not the master? So back in 2017, I delivered one of my usual lectures on capitalism is broken and Islamic finance and all that kind of stuff. And somebody in the audience asked me, what do I think of Bitcoin? And I knew very little about it. And he explained, well, it has this, and this characteristics. And I realized it was a bit like gold. I went away and I researched it, and I realized that it was even better than gold. To my amazement, it struck me that it is the most Sharia compliant form of money next to gold. I now believe it's better than gold. Why do I think Bitcoin may be the most Sharia compliant form of money known to man? because it encourages deferred gratification. It represents sabr or patience. It's hard money. It can't be created. It's an investment in our future. And ultimately, as Muslims, we believe in our investment in the akhirah and to be stewards of our planet. We care about the future of our children, of our grandchildren, of the people, of the generations who come after us. We act responsibly and dutifully in this life. We train our nafs in Ramadan. One of our most valued qualities is sabr, patience. We focus on spiritual health, mental health, and physical health. These things are important to us because our minds and our bodies are a gift from Allah. We recognize mindless consumerism and material values will not help us in this life. Sorry, in the next life. We intuitively know that GDP and economic growth are not good measures of human progress, even if we know nothing about economics, right? It's common sense. And I'm saying we don't need to speak Latin to have common sense. We know that riba is a cancer. Allah has told us that He's permitted trade and banned usury. And curing riba can cure so many ills in society. Again, I ask the question, what if there was a monetary system that was inherently anti-riba? Because you couldn't create money from thin air. You couldn't just create it. In the same way you have to mine gold from the ground to increase the amount of gold in circulation, you would have to mine this Bitcoin for there to be more Bitcoin in circulation. And at some point, there would be a finite limit to it. Let's ask the question, what is sound money? Money, as I said, is a medium of exchange. It should not be a commodity. A sound money is a store of value, a medium of exchange, a unit of account. It's decentralized. So no one entity or small group of entities is able to control it or manipulate it or change its price. It has salability across time and space. It's accepted by society. It has social acceptance. Sound money leads to a free market in the way that a global gold standard led to a free, borderless global market, not a manipulated one. And this is a really important point because Islam believes in free markets, free of human manipulation. This is the narration by Anas ibn Malik. The people asked the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, prices have shot up, so fix prices for us. Therefore, Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, Allah is the one who fixes prices, who withholds, who gives lavishly and provides. And I hope that when I meet Allah, none of you will have any claim on me for an injustice regarding blood or property. This is a very profound hadith, very profound. Because he's been asked by the companions, prices in the market are shooting up. Please fix the prices for us. Please issue a decree that says, wheat is fixed at X price. And he's saying, no. Allah determines the prices of commodities. It's in the hands of God. It's not in my hands, not in the hands of government. It's not in the hands of human beings. Prices are free to move as Allah determines. So for any of you who are thinking of going into politics, whenever you make policy decisions about people's wealth, you open yourself up to potentially oppressing people and for them to consequently claim their rights against you on the day of judgment for having been oppressed by them because of your policy decisions. It's a huge amana, a sacred trust for those of you who are thinking of going into politics. It's very interesting what scholars have been saying about Bitcoin. There's a lot of FUD going on. FUD, anyone heard this expression, FUD, FUD? It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's basically a propaganda tactic. So you will read a lot from governments, from many ulama, from economists, that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme. It's a scam. You're going to be fed this a lot. Luckily, you're younger and you carry much less baggage than middle-aged men like myself. They're set in their ways and they refuse to believe that there could be an alternative monetary system. So I'm going to give you one example. Egypt's Grand Mufti, Sheikh Shawki Alam, he issued a fatwa against Bitcoin because the government in Egypt had banned Bitcoin. He claimed to have met economic experts prior to the ruling. Of course, these economic experts are basically government-appointed orthodox neoliberal economists. They are the priests of Fiat that I keep talking about. And they fear a medium of exchange that robs them of their raison d'etre, their reason to exist. And it robs the government of control of the people because they can't manipulate currency. The reason for the ban was illogical. He said it allows money laundering, fraud, and terrorism. What do you think is the best currency in the world for me to do money laundering, fraud, and terrorism? It's cash, US dollar. I want to do money laundering, I'll use that, thank you very much. He said, I ban it because there's no set rules for cryptocurrency. Actually, and he says, because of course, gharar is uncertainty, it voids the contract if there's uncertainty in a contract. But of course, all fiat currency in the world is uncertain. You only use your £10 note in a shop because you have faith that that £10 note means something. Even the Bank of England says this on its own website, by the way. If you go to their website, you will see that they say that a shop is not obliged to take your £10 note as currency, not obliged to. There's no legal reason why. It's not backed by anything. People who say that it's backed by something. So of course, if the Grand Mufti is saying that Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general is financing money laundering and terrorism and fraud and is uncertain, it has gharar, it has no set rules, well, actually, he should be banning the US dollar, frankly, because it's the worst of the lot. We've seen a lot of social media scholars. Actually, there's just been a bit of FUD from some Indonesian ulama very recently, you might have read it. And they said it was banned and it was haram. And they clearly don't understand what they're saying. I read one, I saw a video from a very, very senior sheikh. I don't think I'm going to name him because it's not very fair. I respect him a great deal. He sits on a very major fiqh council in the UK. He clearly didn't understand the basics of the monetary system or the financial system. And he was saying things like, well, he declared all cryptocurrency haram because he says we don't need to go into technicalities, into details of how to create a cryptocurrency. We don't need to discuss these things. So he dismisses out of hand. He went on to demonstrate basic factual errors in economics. He said that paper money was created by governments and central banks. And I've just said to you, 97% of all money circulating is created by private sector banks, not by the government. He said the government makes an undertaking to replace paper money with something, which is nonsense. It doesn't make any such undertaking. As I say, if a shop refuses to accept your pounds, it can refuse. He says that crypto is not backed by anything real or a government undertaking, but then nor is fiat currency. He said it's too volatile. Prices are jumping around based on supply and demand. That's literally how price mechanisms work. They move around because of supply and demand. They're not fixed. That's against the hadith of the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said the volatility was haram, effectively. But what about shares in early stage companies? What about anybody starting their own business? Obviously, it's speculative. You're taking a chance starting your own business. Is that haram? Of course not. That's risk. That's risk taking. Where in Sharia does it say that money has to be backed by gold? I hear this argument a lot from such scholars. Must be backed by gold. Gold is the only Sharia compliant form of money. It didn't say that anywhere. And they keep repeating it. Money is not defined to the nth degree in Sharia. It's left to the social custom of the people. If we decide to start using seashells, and some societies have done this, as money, we can do so. If we all agree that it's a medium of exchange, we can use it. So a lot of these fatwa published by these ulama are rambling and misinformed. They lack basic technical understanding of economics, of finance. If we were to have a truly sound monetary system in which money can't be created from thin air, we would have a free market because prices cannot be manipulated by the act of printing money, QE, quantitative easing. I have a little graph here which talks about the differences between Bitcoin, gold, and fiat. And basically what it's saying is that fiat currency is not durable. It is portable. It is fungible, meaning $1 is the same as another dollar. It is verifiable because I can verify that when I hold my £10 note up that it is an acceptable banknote. It is divisible into smaller units, but it's not scarce because it can be printed at any time. And it's not censorship resistant because a government can decide who is allowed to hold its reserves. Look at what's happening in Afghanistan right now. $10 billion of the Afghanis' money is held in the US Fed. That's stolen from the Afghani people. So the Afghani people will starve and the US will not give them their money. It'll impose sanctions. It'll say, hey, if you implement a government that does this, this, and this, I'll give you your $10 billion back. Theft, pure theft. It is easy to censor the US dollar and the British pound and the euro and so on. You simply impose sanctions against poor, weaker countries. Whereas when you look at Bitcoin, it's durable, it's secure, it's very portable. I can carry around offline and online on my mobile phone. It's fungible because one Bitcoin is like another Bitcoin. It's verifiable. This is very important. Bitcoin, all the transactions in Bitcoin are stored on a distributed ledger, which is in cyberspace, if you like. It's called the blockchain. You may have heard this word, blockchain. And people ask me, what is the blockchain like? The best analogy I can give you guys is think of the memorization of the Quran, right? Is there a central Quran that sits in Mecca somewhere behind a glass cage that everybody refers to and says, this is the correct version of the word of God? Of course not. Instead, we have millions of people around the world who have measured every punctuation mark in the Quran. So this hifz, this memorization of the Quran, is our guarantee that the word of God has been preserved. We don't trust, we verify. Every time we attend the Taraweeh prayers in Ramadan, and we stand behind the Imam, and we hear his recitation of the whole Quran during the month, have you noticed how many people are standing in the front row who are able to correct him when he makes a mistake? Now think about how many mosques there are in the world with the number of people in each mosque who can memorize the Quran. And then how many millions around the world who have memorized this book to every punctuation mark. That's the don't trust, verify model. And that's what the blockchain is. Every single transaction is verified by every single node on the blockchain. So the clearest analogy I can give you of a censorship-resistant, immutable, distributed ledger is the memorization of the Quran. And that's what the blockchain is. That's the analogy that I give you guys. Okay, so we've talked about the ulama and that we have a problem with them. How are we doing for time? We're going to finish fairly soon. Okay. In the 19th century, the Ottoman governor of Egypt, Mehmet Ali Pasha, introduced water faucets, taps, into the Mehmet Ali Mosque in Cairo. And believe it or not, the ulama actually debated whether one was allowed to use taps to perform one's wudu for the purpose of praying. It sounds like a crazy argument to be having, right? But they debated whether it was actually compliant with Sharia to do so. And it turned out that the only group of scholars who said it was permissible were the Hanafis. And so taps, henceforth in many parts of the Arab world, are known as Hanafiya. I don't know if you've heard this word, but Hanafiya are taps. That's one example of ulama debating something that seems a little bit nonsensical today. One of the theories contended for the decline of the Ottoman Empire is the fact that the printing press was banned on pain of death, although this is the subject of much debate actually. And there are some sources that say this is not true, and there are some sources that say this is true. I tend to believe that there is significant evidence to suggest that the Ottomans fell behind Europe because of their lack of use of the printing press. And some of the decrees of the time are a reason for that. One of the theories is that the first printing press in Istanbul in 1727 aroused so much suspicion because it clashed with the scholars' tradition of oral dissemination of information. So this was a sort of suicidal willingness to embrace ignorance. And I think it was a contributing factor in the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman scholars also debated the distance of a telegraph wire from the mosque, arguing that it conveyed the voice of shaitan. Therefore, is it halal to have a telegraph wire near the mosque? Deobandis very recently, at the turn of the 20th century, debated banning, in fact, they did ban the loudspeaker. In the 1980s, South African ulama banned television irrespective of content. Doesn't matter if you're watching the news, it was banned. So now we think our scholars are more sophisticated, right? We think they're more tech savvy, they're more scientifically aware, they understand medical ethics and all these kind of interesting and complex subjects. Well, I think on the subject of cryptocurrency and specifically Bitcoin, I'm afraid the vast majority are very much unaware. And there's a very, very small number of young, gifted individuals, scholars, who actually understand the subject well enough. Is Bitcoin Sharia compliant? Obviously, I'm going to say I believe it is very Sharia compliant. I believe it is the most Sharia compliant form of money invented by man. In fact, that's why I've termed this lecture God's money. It's like gold because it's inflation proof, it's decentralized, it's divisible, it's scarce, it's finite, it has a high stock to flow ratio. In other words, a lot of stock of it, but very little flow. You only mine gold at 1.5% per year, right? Whereas the US dollar, if I'd held $100 at the beginning of the 20th century, by the end of the 20th century, in real terms, it'd be worth $4. That's a 96% stealth tax by the US government. But you guys never realized that until now, right? That's a regressive stealth tax. Gold doesn't do that. Gold maintains its value over 2,000 years. I think Bitcoin also has additional qualities. It has utility as a currency, which is improving now. It has anonymity, which I think is important, especially to be censorship resistant, so that the people of Afghanistan don't starve. That's Palestine, by the way. People ask, is Bitcoin real? It's real for them. They're using it to escape oppression. Bitcoin for them, and I recommend an author to you, Alex Gladstein. He writes regularly for Bitcoin magazine, brilliant author. He's just written a piece. I just tweeted one, if you want to have a look into it, it's about super imperialism. So have a look for that article. He contends that it's a peaceful protest against a corrupt, exploitative, centralized financial system. So today, Lebanon and Gaza are turning to Bitcoin because it protects them against hyperinflation and external meddling. So for example, the Gazans, they have no central bank of their own, and they have to rely on the Israeli shekel. So across their border, they have to rely on the central bank for a government that obviously oppresses them. This is pure zulm. This is oppression in its purest form. This is how to starve a people into submission. So I sincerely believe that Bitcoin has given them a glimpse of possible economic freedom because it is censorship resistant. It cannot be expropriated in the way that gold was by the US government in 1933. Sanctions do not work when you do not control the money. And that's another reason why I think the people of Afghanistan would do very well to look at Bitcoin. As I say, I think it can save them. And I believe it to be the most Sharia compliant form of money. So repressive fiat regimes, the US dollar and so on, create societies of debt slaves and dependency. I bet most of you are already beginning to fall into this trap because you have student loans, right? You're already in that cycle. Sound money is, I believe, a route out of dependency. It means the government can't inflate its way out of trouble. Governments will oppose anything that takes that control away from them. That's why you're being fed FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, this propaganda war. They're trying to make the idea of central bank digital currencies attractive to you, CBDCs. They're saying, yeah, we heard about this thing, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and whatever, but we'll produce the pound sterling version of this called central bank digital currency. What it will do is give them even more control over you because now they can see every transaction you ever make. And maybe they can start censoring the type of transactions that you make. Maybe one day they'll tell you, we don't really like this donation you made to National Zakat Foundation. Tell us more about this. Maybe they'll say that to you. We already know that we're a community that's being spied on. We know about Prevent. We know about government policies. We should be allowed to use currencies, to use a sound money that is free from central bank manipulation and government interference and government observation. I don't want to be spied on. So a land grab is taking place at the moment. The greatest transfer of wealth in human history is taking place at this very moment. And the boomer generation doesn't understand it, but you guys have to understand it. Because if you don't do it quickly, you'll get left behind as well. So don't cede your intelligence to the ulama. They're not getting it. Some of the young ones are. Some of the technically sophisticated, savvy ones are. Don't allow them to dictate to you in this respect what is and isn't halal. Would you ask a plumber to do brain surgery on you? Would you ask a brain surgeon to do plumbing on you in your house? Obviously not. I think many of these guys are stepping out of the lane. I'm going to skip this one really. I often deliver a talk which focuses on the difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The example I use is what was then Mark Zuckerberg's Libra, which I consider to be more a stable coin. But it's not something I want to focus on. The message I tend to get across is Bitcoin, because it's free from manipulation, because it's finite, and because it has a huge network effect now, is the William Wallace of the currency world. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Braveheart. William Wallace sought independence for Scotland, and he's shouting freedom. And I think Bitcoin is freedom money. Okay, we're going to round up quickly, and we'll have some Q&A in a bit. We'll talk about the future of Islamic finance. So my background is in Islamic finance, Islamic banking. I've tried to work from the inside for over 2 decades and nearly 3 decades to fix it. I've now reached a conclusion, based on the types of institutions I've worked in, that no matter how hard I try, I can't translate what I think are noble ideals into actual product creation that is pure and ethical and aligned with the values that we all value. We believe in investing for our akhirah. We believe in controlling our nafs. We don't believe in mindless consumerism, right? These values are not inherent in the banking system today. So I think Bitcoin really is Islamic economics. It has low time preference. It invests for the akhirah, it shuns consumerism, disciplines one's ego, inculcates sabr, it encourages free markets, it condemns and corrects inequality. Look what's happening in Gaza and what hope it means for them. It's about the real economy and risk sharing, because Allah created dirhams and dinars to act as fair exchange between people. That's Ghazali. That's what Bitcoin is. It's about the real economy, about real trade and services. It's risk sharing. Islamic bankers are always talking about, oh, we do risk sharing, we do risk sharing. It's completely asymmetric. When they lend you money, it's an asymmetric deal that they're doing with you. You take all the risk, they don't take any risk. That's not Islamic finance. That's not the ideal Islamic economic model. That's not the one that we tried to institute many years ago, right? It's a replication of the conventional banking industry. It's sanctity of property rights, censorship resistant, free from state interference. It feasts on corruption and manipulation. That's why governments don't want you to have it. I don't think in my living memory, I've ever had such a corrupt government in this country. I don't want to give them the tools to control me further and introduce new fascist laws into this country. Bitcoin can help that, can help stop that happening. I believe it's anti-riba. You can't create it from thin air. That means you can't create an excess of it. Fiat currency is inherently riba-based. Fractional reserve banking is a riba process. It creates new money from nothing. That's the definition of riba. Bitcoin doesn't do that. It's anti-riba. And that's why I believe it's the future of the Islamic economic model. One more thing I want to say, actually. We've just had COP26, and there's a lot of talk about environmental pollution, and there's a lot of FUD about Bitcoin as well, about it being very energy intensive. I'm happy to take questions on this afterwards. Don't believe that FUD, because if Bitcoin became our global monetary base, it would replace the fiat system. And in doing so, it would replace a hugely energy intensive monetary system that is backed by military violence. The energy that goes into protecting the US dollar is the might of the US military, which is more than the next 10 military budgets in the world. If you added up all the other military budgets, the next 10, the US would be equivalent to that. That's the amount of energy that goes into protecting the US dollar today. Energy usage is good, by the way. We use it to do useful things with our lives. We have washing machines and kitchen appliances and other things in our lives that do useful things. We can't exist without any energy. We have to use some of it. And it's good to look for clean energy and renewable energy, and nuclear energy is the cleanest of all, but of course it has other issues. So this argument that Bitcoin is bad for the environment is absolute nonsense, because it would replace a financial system that is much, much more wasteful. Even Lord Adair Turner, who is the former head of the UK financial regulator, said that most of banking is socially useless. And I'm telling you as an insider, I was an investment banker with 2 bulge bracket firms. Most of it is socially useless. And this can make our economy a real economy with risk sharing in place. So thank you for that. Let's have some questions. Yeah, do you know? Oh, I'll leave her to.
Yeah,
to do
I'm quite nervous with the computer in the water. Inshallah.
Do you want to help us just turn this side facing this way? But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move this away.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair for that engaging talk. I'm sure everybody has plenty of questions. Plenty of questions about cryptocurrency, student finance, really laserize whatever comes to mind. There is the Menti code on the board in case you have any anonymous questions or if you want to upvote anybody else's queries, just so we can kind of get an idea of what people want to hear about. But I will be prioritizing in-person questions. So let's start with the brother in the back.
Thank you so much for the talk. Actually, I really enjoyed the talk. I actually listened to you many months ago with Dr. Sadia on this podcast, which is really helped me to this one. Many of my friends have done it. That Bitcoin is real and Bitcoin is definitely not around. So my question to you is not about Bitcoin, it's about cryptocurrency. I have a question about decentralized finance, DeFi. So actually, I was very intrigued for attracting to decentralized finance, DeFi, because of the purpose that it will help give more people access to the banking system. So I am from a very poor country. I'm from Sudan. Most of people in Sudan are unbanked, so about 90% of they have no access to the bank. So I used it. So initially, I was blown away because it's very easy to use. We just need to just have the wallet, and then you just go use it, and then you do whatever you want. The user is very useful, but when I studied in details, actually was a Ponzi scheme, if you will, or flat out haram. You just put some money there, and then the money they will make so much money.
Yeah.
So the question is, could we make this DeFi financially or Islamically compliant?
Yeah. So
that's one question.
Yeah. Okay. So
second question about staking.
I'm actually going to grab my paper and pen because I don't have the memory that you guys have, so I'm going to have to write things down as I go through. Go ahead.
So the first question is, can we make DeFi Sharia compliant?
Yeah.
And the second question, I personally run a validator node to one of these cryptocurrencies, so I get reward as for me just running node. So is this considered legal? Or what do you think?
Okay. So very briefly, because I know that some people are watching online. The first question is DeFi, decentralized finance, Sharia compliant? And the second question is about validating. I don't want to answer this. My apologies, I don't want to answer the second question, partly because I'm not technically qualified to answer that question, but we can discuss some issues around it afterwards, right? Because I think it's quite a complex discussion, and we'd end up having like a jargon conversation between us, and there's other people sitting here. So let me answer the first question and focus on that. Afterwards, we'll have a chat as well. The question is Islamic decentralized finance. Is it possible? So this is something that I really strongly believe in, and I'm very excited about. The idea that you can have a financial institution that does not sit in the conventional fractional reserve banking system, but sits in a decentralized way and is able to offer financial products to people based on a Bitcoin monetary base. I strongly believe that if you have a monetary base, which itself is Sharia compliant and cannot be created out of thin air, et cetera, that you can create financial products on top of that are decentralized and hence DeFis, which are Sharia compliant, which is the essence of what the Islamic banking should have been in the first place, instead of being based on fractional reserve banking. So yes, it's a simple answer to that. In practice, what I'm seeing happen right now is Me Too. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and they're producing DeFi institutions that are doing all sorts of stupid stuff that is replicating interest-bearing loans and staking with interest and blah, blah, blah. All sorts of stupid stuff that is not Sharia compliant.
They give you money to borrow.
Yeah, it's just pure credit and debt, and they're just trying to do what the conventional banking industry does, but with the lens of cryptocurrency on top of it. So I don't talk about crypto at all anymore, right? You maybe heard the phrase, excuse me for using it, I'll use it once and I won't use it again, Bitcoin or shitcoin, right? For me, it's only Bitcoin. That's the only currency I see that has all the characteristics to be the most Islamic form of money in the world. Yeah. So that's why I'm very excited about Sharia compliant DeFi, but to date, nobody has done it. But I'm seeing a couple of very interesting things starting to happen. So I'm focusing very closely on those.
So you believe that DeFi should only happen in Bitcoin, for example?
Look, yeah, let me not say that Bitcoin is the only Sharia compliant form of money. Of course, gold and silver is. Of course it is, right? If you could create a cryptocurrency that was only gold backed and had certain other characteristics, then it can easily be Sharia compliant. But I asked the question, why would you do that? Why would you bother? When 1 billion people are already using Bitcoin, it has social acceptance now, right? Why would you go out and create and then tell people, you're just preying on people's religious insecurities. Oh, brother, I've got a Sharia compliant, gold-backed cryptocurrency, brother. You need to do this because it's Islamic now. That's why Islamic banking failed, because Islamic financiers decided that they needed to reassert themselves, a sort of post-colonial identity seeking by having Islamic banking that would make Muslims great again. And then they just ended up replicating conventional banking. Sometimes you take things that are good from neighboring civilizations. We did that in our golden age. We took things from China and India, and we took their maths and their science and technology, and we made it better. We took Greek philosophy and we translated it. Europe would have lost Greek philosophers if it hadn't been for us, right? We took the good things from other civilizations and made them better. Bitcoin is a great thing. We should take it and use it and make it better.
Questions from sisters. Please go. You're up. Maybe we have a question.
Switching a bit more like the practical side of money and like Bitcoin that we have right now. Do you think it's possible realistically to buy a house for yourself without investing in a mortgage?
It's very difficult because house prices are so madly expensive. So how would you buy a house without taking a mortgage? So we're all in a trap, and it's a trap that's been created by our governments. Some people will use the argument, if you get into Bitcoin at the ground level right now, or if you've done it a few years ago, if you've still got time, Bitcoin is not inflationary money. And therefore, as all the other currencies in the world are devaluing, the US dollar and so on. Remember this number I told you at the beginning of the 20th century, $100, by the end of the 20th century would be worth $4, right? Bitcoin is going the opposite direction. So people say the true value of Bitcoin is potentially infinite and the true value of the dollar is potentially zero, right? So that's one solution, is to hold on to a currency that is appreciating versus fiat currencies. But whether it's actually practically possible to own a home today in this country with house prices as they are without taking out a mortgage, it's extremely difficult, right? So I'm not going to sit here and be holier than thou and say, oh, brother, sister, you shouldn't take a mortgage, But on the other hand, I personally, I tend to err on the side of saying, look, if you have a choice, if you can, try the Islamic bank instead. Because at least there is some attempt being made to take an underlying asset and charge you a rent against that asset. At least the contracts say that, even if the spirit of the law is somewhat different, even if the economics is somewhat different, right? At least there was an attempt to make it halal. Same with the meat. Beef that has been slaughtered in a halal way versus beef that has not been slaughtered in the correct way. They both taste the same, they both look the same, they both smell the same and whatever. But one has been sanctified and the other has not. And I would rather have that than the other. That's what I say. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so we're quite lucky to have the venue until 8:30 today. I'm conscious that if anybody does have to go, please feel free. Just before we go back to the brothers, I'll do one from the mentee. Currently the most popular is, what do you think about NFTs?
Okay, I have to be very careful with this. The reason I have to be very careful is because I'm Gen X, right? So I carry some baggage, and I like the real world. I go for a run every morning, and I love the smell of the countryside that I run through, and I like the real world, and I like the 4 seasons that I run in, and I'm old school in that respect. I don't want to live in the metaverse. I don't want to live in virtual reality. I understand as a kid when you collect football stickers, for example, or in America they collect baseball cards, how those items can have a value because they may be rare. And I understand how somebody might want to collect something in the virtual world, and it might be rare, it might be worth something. But what I'm seeing instead is an absolutely vacuous, stupid culture of stupid things being sold for stupid money in the metaverse. It makes no sense to me on any common sense level. And we're people of common sense, right? Islam is a religion for people who think. So I'm afraid I'm not buying into the idea of NFTs. There's something I think is very interesting with NFTs, and that is in the entertainment industry. For example, a lot of musicians are saying that they get to keep the proceeds from their work because there's no middleman anymore. And I can kind of understand that. It cuts out a lot of the middleman. And that makes a lot of sense for me in certain industries. But this idea of, at the best of times, I don't understand modern art anyway, but this idea that, you know, we should be paying £100 million for a JPEG of somebody's back garden. Why don't you live in the back garden, guy? I mean, enjoy the real world. You know, life will have passed you by and you'll be living with a headset and a microphone for all your life. I have a teenage son who seems to live in the metaverse, and I have to kick him off the computer every now and then. I don't want him to live in that universe. I want him to go outside and play football with his friends. That's why I'm not a big fan of NFTs. And maybe that's old-fashioned to me. Maybe I missed the point, but I'm happy with that. Please take the gentleman at the bottom there. He's been putting his hand up all day.
Thank you. So first, I'm into stock investing. So what I'm a bit apprehensive about Bitcoin because of all the FUD that I've received. So you mentioned something about Bitcoin being this. You said Bitcoin isn't for money laundering. It's just the exact opposite of what everyone else is saying. But I find it quite hard to actually agree to that because like, have you heard of coin mixers? It's a way which people can hide their identity when they buy things. And so how do you say that Bitcoin in this case?
Why does my identity need to be known to buy something? Why? I mean, you know, I want to pay my builder for some work he's doing on my roof or something, and he wants to be paid in cash. Okay, I mean, you know, it's legal. I'm allowed to pay somebody in cash if I want to and he wants to. Right? It's legal tender. And the bank has to ask me all sorts of questions. You know, who's your builder? Why do you need this money? Sorry, who are you? You're the people who are the custodians of my money. It's my money. It's my roof. I want to pay for it. Why do I have to answer these questions? Or because you might be buying drugs. I mean, so what? What's it to you? This is the way the government controls what we do, and it's very dangerous for Muslims. It's very dangerous for us because if we allow them to do that, the next thing they know, they're spying on us in the mosques. I've got examples of friends of mine who have been who have had attempted recruitments by security services in this country, and they do it by suggesting naughty things to them, or you know, we should do this, brother, we should do that, brother. You know, this is an attempt to subvert us, a false flag, in other words, right? We're already a community that's spied on. Why do I want to be spied on more? This is for people like us who are already experiencing oppression in places like Afghanistan and Gaza, right? I don't want $10 billion of Afghani money held up in the US Fed because they want to change a government, because they're going to starve us out. That's why I want anonymity. That's why I don't want to have to justify every transaction that I do. And if central bank digital currencies come in, we're finished. Every time we make a charitable donation to Islamic Relief, we're in trouble, man. We're not going to be able to even make donations to starving people in Palestine and Kashmir and God knows where else. That's why I don't want this.
Second question is, so I got this, I guess, talk with my other flatmate the other day, invited him to attend this talk. He said that Islamic finance is bull, and then he said that because the fees, it's so rigid, you can't charge interest, but then the fees, it's actually so high, it's almost like you're getting interest.
I think you're talking about Ethereum, right?
No, I'm talking about like a general Islamic finance system.
Oh, I see, right, okay.
He did this argument against the Islamic financial system. I think he had it there in your slides. Said that
Yeah.
The fees are so high, it's so rigid,
Yeah.
they're so risky.
So I did a Twitter thread about a month ago. I was so angry about a transaction that I participated in with an Islamic bank that I felt that I couldn't hold back anymore. And I had to just rant about the ludicrous fees, the ludicrous profit rates, the incredibly long delays, the massively risk-averse credit process. I mean, this is a massive failing of the industry. It's completely failed the customer. I can understand why people come to me and say, well, not only do I think that it's kind of a fraudulent industry, it's not even halal, it's just dressing it up with Arabic words, but it's also madly expensive. Why would I want to use it when I can go to HSBC and literally pay half the rate for a mortgage, literally? Why would I use it? What incentive is there to use Islamic banking? So I'm with you on that. I have huge sympathy. And unfortunately, I personally am prepared to pay the extra and go through the pain just because I feel it's better the devil you know. Right?
And one last, how would an Islamic bank then use Bitcoin to lend money? How would they charge it?
So the theory is that they will buy the asset like the house and they will charge you rent on the portion that you don't own. Right? So if they finance 90% of it and you finance 10% of it, they would charge you rent on the 90%. And you would also buy back your portion of the bit that you don't own. So that would be like the principal and interest payment, except it's principal lump sum payment and the rent for the bit that you don't own. And over 20 years, like a conventional mortgage, you buy it back. Now, in my view, there's nothing wrong with that, in theory. In practice, the risk has been skewed in the same way that conventional banks have an asymmetric risk relationship with their customers. So they've lost the spirit of Islamic finance. And I sit on the advisory board of a company called Primary Finance, one of these small fintech companies founded by young Muslim entrepreneurs who wanted to create a debt-free home financing product. Alhamdulillah, they've managed it. They've raised a lot of money from the Muslim community. Please look them up. If you ever look to finance your houses when you graduate, look up Primary Finance. That's an example of a structure, a financial structure that is truly debt-free and a way of financing your home in a manner that's aligned with our values. But the Islamic banks won't do that because they're run by the wrong people. It's been hijacked, right?
Back to the sisters.
I just wanted to ask whether Bitcoin is a sustainable currency that can be effectively translated into our communities, or like would it only leaders that have the access to knowledge that can be able to gain from it? And how would you go about sort of like translating this economic system into our communities and grassroots level?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things we lack is financial education. So that's the very first step, is everybody get educated, because what concerns me about financial economics is we all decide that it should be something that's handled by other people, and we stop using our common sense. So the first thing I'm asking everybody here is to use our common sense. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, right? So as a community, we're not very financially savvy, and we get taken in by scams a lot. It seems to happen to our communities a lot. I don't know why that is. We seem very gullible, right? There's a lot of cryptocurrency scams out there. Bitcoin is actually pretty straightforward to understand on a technical level. There's a lot of literature out there. I've named some authors: Alex Gladstein, Saifuddin Ammous, Alan Farrington. Tariq al-Dawani is the original cult figure in Islamic finance. The book he wrote called The Problem with Interest. There's great resources out there. It's very easy for us to learn this stuff. And it's very easy for us to transact in Bitcoin if we choose to. There are secondary layers being established on top of Bitcoin, like Lightning Network, which allows us to buy a coffee with Bitcoin if we choose to, using our mobile phones, right? So these things are very accessible to us. We should educate ourselves. I think that the financial products that we need to build on top of this monetary layer That's going to be a difficult next step. And that's one of the things that I'm personally working on right now, because I'm so disillusioned with the Islamic banking industry that I feel that it has to be a DeFi way of doing these things, right? That will take time. But in the meantime, I would like our communities to get educated and start to take in, even though I make fun of my teenage son for living in the metaverse, I'm proud at least that he opened his own Bitcoin wallet and he's already educating himself, because I think it's really, really important. At the end of this talk, please, everybody get out and open a Bitcoin wallet. Learn how to do it. Just play around with a few pennies, no more than that, just pennies. Just see how it works. Because if we all do that and we start orange pilling everybody else, pretty soon the social concurrence will be that Bitcoin is a ubiquitous currency for everyone, a medium of exchange for everybody. We need to have everybody using it. And once you do, the technical layer on top will be easy. It'll be our mobile phones.
Next question is, are ISA accounts halal? Do halal saving accounts exist?
Okay, so ISA, as you know, is an individual saving account or an individual, I think that's what it stands for. It's basically a tax wrapper that the British government gives to you. It says that you're allowed to invest £20,000 a year, up to £20,000 a year, tax-free. In other words, you're not charged any capital gains tax or income tax on the dividends from anything that you invest in within this wrapper, right? So it's like you invested in an account with a brokerage and you buy stocks and shares, or you have a savings account. And any of the returns you get from that are tax-free from the government. It's very nice. Are they halal? Well, it depends if the underlying investment is halal, right? So if, for example, it was invested in stocks, let's say a fund that invests in generally deemed Sharia compliant stocks, and normally you need a fatwa to certify that it is Sharia compliant, then yeah, the ISA is halal. But if it invests in pork belly futures, then no, it's not halal, right? Or if it invests in bonds, bonds is the obvious one, right? Bonds are interest-bearing loan instruments that are listed on an exchange somewhere. Anytime someone says the word bond to you, it means an interest-bearing debt product. Obviously, that's haram, right? So it just depends what the underlying is. Unfortunately, there are very, very few Sharia-compliant funds and Islamic products to invest in this country. It's very hard finding them. Because I'm a professional who works in this space, for me, it's easy. For everybody else, it's really hard. Nobody has yet worked out. There's a very good company, if you guys want to investigate, called Islamic Finance Guru. I like them very much. They're good guys. They have created a website and an online app that helps you invest your savings in Sharia compliant ways. So check them out, look at their blogs, look at their videos. I really like those guys. I think they're doing a lot of good work for educating Muslims, and also a good product that's helping us to get access in an easy way to Sharia compliant investment products.
Some of you might remember Ibrahim Khan, who co-founded Islamic Finance Guru. He's written CUISoc in the past. Question from the brothers next. Yes, brother.
I have a more difficult question for some because I know you mentioned like life sector. I understand that Bitcoin transactions are fundamentally very slow. It's not very good or bad. I'm afraid.
You say slow, they're very slow.
They're very slow.
Yeah.
They're very efficient.
Yeah.
These numbers swipe through these technical overlay layers. However, this is a question. Don't you think this is a way to eventually be hijacked again? Because if you implement the argument, this Islamic network, to some extent, this will probably go to sacrifice some of the decentralized aspects of Bitcoin.
Yeah, to a degree, when you've got a secondary layer on top of a primary layer, then that always introduces the opportunity for bad actors to do bad things. Yeah, of course, that's true. But in the same way that the financial services industry seem to get some credibility among certain people. So, you know, people think that names like JP Morgan and HSBC and Standard Chartered and so on are respectable names in the financial services space. And they are prepared to take the risk of putting their money with them. I think we're going to see the same thing emerging in the Bitcoin space. We'll have certain custodians or secondary layers or DeFi financial services that people will have more trust in. And that's the nature of human reality. We trust certain people, we don't trust others. Yes, it introduces the possibility of bad actors, but as long as the primary layer remains Bitcoin, we know that every single transaction ultimately is recorded on the blockchain.
If there aren't any from the sisters, I will ask. Oh, at the back. Where did you award the blockchain?
Sorry, just repeat that. Where would you draw the line with? Yeah, so as I say, and I'm not going to repeat that phrase that I used earlier because you're the Islamic Society and I have to be very careful with my language. For me, it's only Bitcoin. I am not convinced by any other cryptocurrency. And people say to me, oh, but I think the technology blockchain is much more interesting than the application Bitcoin. I disagree with that. I think the only good use case of the technology of blockchain is Bitcoin. And anyone else who says, oh, I'm doing something on the blockchain, or I've created another cryptocurrency using the blockchain, and they throw this word around a lot, I stopped listening, because for me, the network effect of Bitcoin is so powerful now. We're all using it. There's 1 billion people. It has social concurrence. For me, it doesn't make any sense to introduce another one. Any cryptocurrency project that has a CEO is already doomed to failure, in my opinion. Because then it has an individual or a small group of individuals who are controlling and manipulating it. Bitcoin does not have a CEO. It's completely decentralized, right? And that's really, really important. There's no single central bank. And the laws of this universe have already been established, right? It's a universe that's been set into motion now. You can't change those anymore. So we know what we're getting. So I don't believe in any other cryptocurrencies because they're all relatively easy to manipulate if you start from scratch. What was the second question? Remind me. Oh, volatility, yes. Okay, so we are 10 years into a 30-year experiment. It's going to be volatile because it's still a child. It's more than a child now, actually. It's growing up fast, and you expect to have fluctuation. But what is it volatile against? It's volatile versus the US dollar. Which is volatile, US dollar or Bitcoin? That's the question that you should be asking yourself, right? A lot of scholars have said, I don't like it because it's volatile, therefore it's haram, it's speculative. If you invest in a startup company, that's speculative. It's not haram to invest in it. If you decide that you're going to establish a home business, knitting jumpers, it might fail, it might succeed. Do you decide I'm not going to invest in it because that's volatile? Of course not. It's a halal business, right? So as I say, we're early, and prices are moving respective to fiat currencies. But maybe that's because fiat currencies are the problem, not Bitcoin. That's what the people of Gaza are finding out. It's saving them right now, right? The ones who are looking at Bitcoin and using Bitcoin right now are free from the oppression of the Israeli shekel. Yeah, I do accept, yes, you're right, gold has for 5,000 years been a sound currency, a hard currency. And the problem with gold is that in 1933, it was expropriated by the US government. So private citizens in the US were not allowed to hold it. The government literally stole their gold, right? And the Fed now holds a huge amount of the world's gold reserves. So it's a highly manipulated market. And as I say, only Allah is the one who can fix prices. And gold had that status as a global reserve currency and no longer has that status. So I think Bitcoin has all the characteristics of gold and more, and therefore is an even harder, more sound currency. Make sense?
I think I'll have a couple more questions to wrap up, but again, like I said, we do have the vendor until 5:30 if people would like to ask questions afterwards. one, I just wondering if you could clarify, could you direct us to any scholars who are supportive of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, there are great papers done by Mufti Faraz Adam, who's also the scholar for National Zakat Foundation. There's a great series of YouTube videos by Sheikh Muawiyah Tucker. Sheikh Tucker is a revert to Islam, very knowledgeable on Bitcoin, great understanding of the technical issues. His YouTube videos are very accessible, and he's done lots of them to discuss lots of issues around Bitcoin, so I recommend him. There are a few other scholars that I'm trying to orange pill at the moment, and they are more establishment scholars. And I think once I've hopefully persuaded them that Bitcoin is a monetary system that deserves their attention, then I think things are going to move in a different direction for Muslim countries.
To ask about your views on quantum computing and its effect on civic rights.
So on what? Quantum computing, yeah.
And its effect in the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
That it might have an impact on,
I'm smiling because I got no idea. Computer scientist, Amar, you tell me.
I guess the question is probably like the security of Bitcoin.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. Can you crack it? Yeah. Can you crack it? Yeah. I don't know the answer. I hope not.
My question is also almost related to this. As you are comparing the Bitcoin with the dollar at the time, and give the reason that the dollar is in the hand of the US and Bitcoin, Muslim people can use. But in a Bitcoin, if you use a GPU, this is also a technical question. So even it can go more and more than as compared to the dollar. And if you compare the Muslim countries with the US, then all the supercomputers, the GPUs are with them. So if they got the nature of the GPU.
Are you talking about mining? You're talking about mining?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many more Bitcoin to be mined though, right? We're already at, what is it, 19 million or so, right? There's 21 million is a finite number. So I'm not too concerned about that because there are only a few more to be mined. And even if one entity mines the last 2 million, they don't have 51% control of the network. So I'm not fussed, right? There's already so many in circulation that, you know, you can't, an attack to take over 51% of the network would require more than a coordinated attack by the world's biggest governments. It's impossible. It's so decentralized. It's held by the entire world now. That's why I'm not concerned by that. Does that make sense?
I think the Bitcoin is something that is controlled by the technology, by some servers and central system. So that all system is owned by the US. So
No,
how
it's not. There's no central server. It's completely decentralized. You can own a node if you want, right? There are millions of them all over the place. Yeah, there's no central server that manipulates the price.
And my second question is like, every time some new thing is found, that every time we give some fatwa, that this is halal, this is haram. And if we consider the hadith that we narrated before, that everyone who gives the interest, who takes the interest, and who even supports the interest is in war with Allah. So all the people, so to say, we are sitting here, we are putting our money somehow we bank or we are in any other country.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
somehow we are like not taking the interest, but in somehow we are giving the interest. We give our money to the bank, and the bank gives money to some other as an interest. So do we think we are somehow dealing with the interest in this?
Well, look, I mean, we don't have a choice, right? We can't store our money under a mattress. When our employer pays us our salary, it has to go into a bank account. We don't have a choice over that. So everything we do is tainted by riba in the world, wherever we are. Doesn't matter what country we live in. Everything is touched by riba. We can't escape that. The best we can do is try and avoid it as much as possible. So if you have to use a conventional bank account, at least don't take the interest on that account, or at least give it away, right? It won't count as charity because you're giving away what shouldn't be yours in the first place, but at least you're not sinning by taking it, right?
I would have two more questions, please. First, thank you very much for the lecture. I learned a lot.
My first question would be with regards to the impact of Bitcoin on small businesses. Do you think that it's, first, I have the feeling that one of the nefarious aspects of the fiat system is also that it brings an unfair competition between big businesses and small businesses.
Correct, correct.
Because big businesses have a very, very easy access to liquidity.
Correct, exactly right.
And especially in period of tightening of economic policy,
Yes.
access to liquidity is
They get access first, correct, absolutely right. Yes. So the money spigot I was talking about earlier, yes.
Yeah. So do you think that the growing importance of Bitcoin could eventually help leveling the playing field?
Yeah, because money creation doesn't happen at the top, and it doesn't have to filter down until people at the bottom get it. Bitcoin is not, it's not created by a central bank, so it's non-inflationary. You can't print more of it, and therefore small businesses are not disadvantaged versus big businesses, because that Saifuddin Ammous fiat business model, the 5-step process, doesn't apply in that case, right?
You answered briefly to my second question. It's actually a tweet by Saifuddin that made me learn this. It was fascinating because it's the first time I understood why real estate prices were so high. And he explained that because of the constant devaluation of fiat,
correct,
housing is now the real store of value. So do you see prices of real estate eventually decreasing with the renewal of like a real currency?
I think it's more like asking what is the value of a house or any commodity versus the value of a hard currency. Its value against a soft money like the US dollar is almost immaterial, because we can't really, that dollar doesn't have, it has decreasing value. So the question we should be asking is how much is a commodity worth versus, for example, X grams of gold. So if you measure the cost of a bushel of wheat over the course of human history, let's call it 2,000 years, you'll probably find that it would cost the same in the ounces of gold required to buy a bushel of wheat over that period of time. So I think that's probably the question that needs to be asked. Yeah.
I think we'll go until 42. Is there any more questions on the sister side? Yes.
You talked about it a lot. You talked about all the good things. You mentioned that the environmental impact as well. But is there any actual disadvantage to Bitcoin at all? Because it does sound like a very
it's in its infancy, so technically, we are still learning our way around using it as a currency. It takes time to verify transactions. We're waiting for the secondary layers to come online now. That's happening. That has happened, in fact. So the disadvantage is it's poorly understood. People think it's got high barriers to entry, right? We think, oh, how do I use? I can't imagine, how would I explain to my mother how to use Bitcoin to do a transaction, right? She would need to have a very simple way of doing it. She'd need to be able to just boop, stick her mobile phone on a contactless, key card, and it takes off a few Bitcoin from her account, right? When we get to that stage, which is we pretty much are now actually, then I think people will start to use it. So I think that's one of the disadvantages right now, is lack of education, lack of on-ramps, if you like. Other disadvantages, I'm not seeing a lot of downside personally, but you need to ask that of somebody else, and maybe I can answer the FUD instead. And the usual FUD is, money laundering and terrorism and environmental and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
So with the 51% there, so obviously if you have house, you have to control that 51% of the house. And I guess people assume with Bitcoin you have to control 51% of the people. But when you have the secondary layers, that's not true. You only need to control 51% of the things actually on.
But you can't change the underlying transactions on the blockchain. Those are just on-ramps onto the blockchain. They're like...
But if you control 51% of the blockchain, you can rewrite the ledger.
But each miner would have to agree to change it.
Yeah, but like...
and that's not the secondary layer, that's the primary layer.
But as in, there was a wallet, a Bitcoin wallet that reached about 40% a few years ago. And they only went down because, it's run by like computer enthusiasts. So a bunch of wallets agreed not to surpass, I think, 33.
So many years ago, there have been many attacks actually on the network over many years, and they might have succeeded many years ago, but now they can't succeed because it is virtually impossible to get that advantage.
But like, given the modern economy, it's standard for one product to become dominant. So if one payment system became dominant, then
having a payment system is not the same as controlling the blockchain. That's an on-ramp.
Like when a wallet acts on your behalf, it gains like the authority of you. So if it has 40% of the transaction.
How would you get 40% in a wallet?
Well, a wallet, there was a wallet.
But there isn't now, that's my point.
Yeah, but as in, if you had one company that controlled.
Yeah. How? That's what I'm asking you. How would you do that? You would need to buy $1 trillion worth of it now.
But the thing is, you would just need data centers. Like, it's just like
You would need to buy $1 trillion. I'm saying to you, that's the monetary amount. Yeah. How would you do that? You would have to coordinate China, the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Britain, France, Germany. You have to coordinate everybody. Every single government would have to spend their reserves buying up Bitcoin. Right? That's why it can't be done now. That's the beauty of it. Yeah. Make sense?
I'm afraid we're going to have to save any questions, informal chats, debates, raging fights until informal discussion at the end. Quick disclaimer, anything questionable said is not endorsed by either our speaker or CUISoc.
I only swore once.
Yes, thank you very much all for attending. It's been a really good turnout, and it's fantastic to have so many people engaged with really important subject matter like this. So thank you very much for engaging in this open talk.
Thank you.
Stay alaikum, everyone, and feel free to come up, ask questions, or just generally mingle, because we do have the space for a bit longer. So thank you.
So you enjoyed that?
Yes. I'm not normally like a money finance person, so I found that interesting. Was really good.
Okay. We're not recording anyone.
Hopefully not.
Where is this?
Yeah, I think that's